Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Tuesday, November 19th, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the latest film and TV news. My name is Ben Pearson. I am the senior writer at SlashFilm.com, and I am joined on today's episode by Slash Film weekend editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
And writer Chris Evangelista.
Hello, folks.
All right, guys, we haven't talked about the news since, I think, last Wednesday. We have, all these TV recap episodes and stuff that we're doing, and water coolers and all that, so let's dive into the news. We have a lot to discuss. Brad, this morning was apparently an onslaught of Star Wars information, so why don't you walk us through some of the, the most important and interesting stuff that we learned today?
Well, the Emperor is back, and he is a bird.
Oh my god, I would love that so much. Just totally inexplicable, never mentioned.
No, they're obviously still, keeping a lot of stuff under wraps because this is the final chapter of the Skywalker saga, and J.J. Abrams is a big man of mystery. But the Entertainment Weekly did have a big cover issue today for Star Wars where J.J. Abrams opened up a little bit about production, and what's interesting is that they have 3 fewer months of post-production on this movie. So they're actually putting it together extremely quickly. But despite having such a truncated window, Abrams actually feels much more confident and comfortable with where The Rise of Skywalker is at than he did while he was making Force Awakens. In the article, he said, quote, "We had more reshoots on Episode 7 than this one. We had more story adjustments on 7 than this one. We didn't know if these characters would work, if the actors would be able to carry a Star Wars movie. There were a lot of things we didn't know. But on this, we knew who and what worked, and everyone is doing their best work I've ever seen anyone do. But the ambition of this movie is far greater than Force Awakens, and what we set out to do is far more challenging. Everything is exponentially larger on this." And so, we'll get to see that, play out narratively, too, because there's actually a time jump between Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, roughly a year. So everyone is a little bit more of a seasoned Resistance hero. Rey has been training more, and Finn and Poe will get to do a little bit more. Oscar Isaac said specifically he wanted to get Poe out of the cockpit more often. Finn will be a little bit less of, a comedic kind of hero, since he's had some kind of silly moments here and there, and I guess we'll see a different side of Finn than we've seen before. But perhaps the biggest thing that was discussed was the idea of Rey and her origins. It's The Last Jedi basically told us, at least through the eyes and mouth of Kylo Ren, that Rey's parents were filthy junk traders, and they traded her for drinking money, and they were dead, buried in a pauper's grave on Jakku. There's been some debate as to whether or not we can believe Kylo Ren, whether or not he was just trying to manipulate Rey, but she seemed to kind of accept that and almost know deep down that, there wasn't anything special about her parents and that they weren't ever coming back for. Mm-hmm. But that's not really the end of this mystery. And Daisy Ridley actually talked about this, and she said that, quote, "The parents thing is not satisfied for her," meaning Rey, "and for the audience. That's something she's still trying to figure out. Where does she come from? It's not that she doesn't believe what Kylo Ren said, but she feels there's more to the story, and she needs to figure out what's come before so she can figure out what to do next." So the idea of who Rey's parents are, whether or not they are people of significance, may not matter, but her strive to find out who they are and where she came from is still important to her. And just because her parents are nobodies doesn't mean that her entire family is of nobody. So even though it seems pretty clear that she's not a Skywalker, it doesn't mean she's not descendant from somebody else who has, strong Force abilities.
It's interesting to me that she said it's not that she doesn't believe it, but she feels there's more to the story. Brad, where is your head at this point in the cycle? We're a little over a month out from The Rise of Skywalker, and we've gone through so many iterations of being worried that J.J. Abrams might retcon some of the decisions made in Last Jedi and all that. But based on, this quote and some of the other stuff that you've been writing about and reading about, what are you feeling about The Rise of Skywalker and how it's going to sort of wrap all this up? Are you optimistic about it?
I mean, if anything, I feel like who she is will be important. Her parents, as far as their identities are concerned, it's not going to be any bombshell. Maybe something in her family will give her ties to, like I said, somebody who is Force sensitive. But at the end of the day, I think it'll probably be this mix of kind of where we started, where anybody can kind of become a Jedi. You don't have to have this, pure midichlorian-ridden bloodline like the Skywalkers, which have had endless trouble with the Force, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like might have this reconciliation where J.J. Abrams isn't really fixing anything because he's talked, a couple times about how he didn't really have to fix anything that Rian Johnson did, and it didn't upset how he saw the overall story arc playing out. So I feel like what Rey will learn will just be where she came from, and that will give her an idea of her place in this, which is what she was seeking in The Last Jedi to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And it might give her that confidence she needs to realize that she can be a hero, and she doesn't need to, come from a line of heroes to live up to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good read. Let's talk very briefly about the writing credits for The Rise of Skywalker. A story came out, I think, late last week about that. You mentioned trouble earlier, and I think this movie, it's fair to say, started out on a bit of a rocky footing because Colin Trevorrow was hired to write and direct this project originally, but obviously Abrams has come on to take over. But where does the writing credits stand now, Brad?
Yeah, so the Writers Guild of America recently did their arbitration for the movie, which is where they determine who, gets the official writing credits when the movie comes out. And Colin Trevorrow and Derek Connolly, who left the project back when they parted ways with Lucasfilm amicably in September of 2017, will receive a story by credit. And that means that whatever Trevorrow and Connolly worked on before they left the project, a certain amount of it was left or used in some capacity in what J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio did for The Rise of Skywalker, that the WGA determined that they deserve to have a story credit. It's not really clear, exactly what those elements might be or how much they contributed to the story, but I would imagine that maybe there are just some basic elements at play here that Abrams and Terrio used, whether it was intentional or not, because Abrams had previously said they started over, basically. They didn't have a story or anything set up. So, I guess I don't know if we'll get a definitive answer as to what changed between Trevorrow and Connolly's, story ideas and when Abrams and Terrio came on. But it seems like there's at least some crossover there. And some people have speculated, like, well, this could just be a courtesy deal, because Connolly and Trevorrow worked on it for so long that they just get story credit, so they get residuals. But this is WGA arbitration, which means that this is something that the Writers Guild of America determines, and it has nothing to do with Disney's deals with any of the writers.
Yeah, I remember reading a story from Daisy Ridley talking about how I think Trevorrow's script brought her to tears, and sort of being curious and wondering if we would ever see or hear about what that might be. But this decision maybe indicates that at least some of those elements potentially that maybe brought her to tears might actually still end up in the final movie. So maybe in the eventual tell-all book that happens, that hopefully happens one day, we'll learn all about the specifics on that front. But before we leave the galaxy far, far away entirely, let's talk very briefly about the Star Wars Holiday Special. Jon Favreau has talked in the past about wanting to make a new version. Chris, apparently he's kind of serious about this, right?
I honestly don't know how serious he is, but at a fan event for The Mandalorian, he said, quote, "I've been thinking about it. It's ready. The ideas are ready. I think they could be really fun." And he has a little bit more to the quote where he talks about how they drew on Boba Fett from the Star Wars Holiday Special in influencing, The Mandalorian. So it sounds like he's not against the idea. At the same time, it's not like he's definitely going to do it, but it's definitely something he might be interested in doing at some point. But I guess we'll see.
You gotta love those definitely maybe stories,
yes,
right?
Yeah, they're my favorite kind of stories.
I mean, the original Star Wars Holiday Special, Brad, you've seen that, right? Or am I mistaken about that?
Oh yeah, I've seen it.
Okay, I have not seen it. I've not bothered to seek that out. Actually, would you recommend people watch it? Like, is it as a curiosity? Is it worth people's time?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's worth people's time, but it's absolutely like fascinating to watch because it's such a weird thing. Like it's because it's not a Christmas special per se because it's Life Day that they're celebrating, but they try to do similar things that a Christmas special does. Like there's a musical moment and there's an animated component, which is where Boba Fett was first introduced and where they took those elements and brought them into The Mandalorian. But it is so weird and just feels so out of place with everything else in Star Wars. But having said that, I feel like Favreau is a big enough Star Wars fan and he knows how to make stuff like that work that I think he could do something that was cool while also being kind of a cheeky tribute to the holiday special, especially because, you know, I mean, he I think he has a genuine affinity for it because they even snuck in a Life Day reference into the first episode of The Mandalorian.
Yeah.
And he directed Elf too, so he knows what to do with holiday movies. So I think if anybody can pull this off, it's probably only Jon Favreau.
Chris, if they dropped a new holiday special on Disney Plus, would you be interested in checking that out, or are you just totally out? Is that too niche even for you?
I mean, I haven't even watched the second episode of The Mandalorian yet, but I guess I would get around to seeing it eventually.
Okay, all right. Well, let's talk about, I guess, maybe the future of the movie-going landscape as we know it. So yesterday, the Wall Street Journal published a report saying that the Justice Department is basically moving to completely wipe out this court decision that happened in 1948 called the Paramount Consent Decrees. And there's a lot of legalese here, and I'm going to try to just like simplify this and get through it as easily as possible. But I encourage you to read the full article because it provides a little bit more context than we're going to get into here. But basically, for the past 70 years, this ruling has sort of regulated how movie studios distribute their films to theaters. And if this is actually overturned, which it appears like it's going to be, things are going to probably change and probably not for the better. So very briefly, the Paramount Consent Decrees, in the late 30s, the Justice Department sued the major movie studios of the era and basically saying that they had too much control over the industry. The government took like 10 years, but the government ended up winning that case, and the studios had to like divest and give up their ownership of a lot of theaters across the country because they used to own several theaters. It didn't make it fully illegal for studios to own theaters because Disney, for example, has still owns the El Capitan Theater in Hollywood and has for a long time. But small exemptions like that had to basically get court approval. But the large part of this ruling was that studios were no longer allowed to use block booking, which is like the example that I write about in this article is that if Paramount had a new Mission Impossible movie coming out, but the studio also knew that it had a really crappy movie on its hands, the consent decrees made it illegal for Paramount to essentially hold a theater hostage by forcing them to show this crappy movie in order to get access to show the new Mission Impossible movie. And now that ruling is about to be overturned. So it seems pretty likely that things are going to sort of take a downward spiral. I mean, the positives in this situation might be that studios could own theaters again, and buy their own theaters and on a wider scale than they are currently. Like Netflix or Amazon could maybe buy their own theaters, maybe a whole chain even, and potentially offer subscribers access to see their movies in theaters, maybe for free or probably for like a small fee, like a separate subscription tier or something like that. Peter was speculating yesterday that maybe it could result in a divide in the movie chains. Like major companies like AMC and Regal could end up just showing blockbusters, and smaller chains might end up showing smaller films. I'm not 100% convinced that would work, because in this example, like Disney now owns Fox Searchlight, and if smaller theaters wanted to show indie movies like the ones that Searchlight makes, I'm just not sure that Disney would give those smaller theaters access to just the Searchlight movies without also, basically pairing them, block booking them with the next big Marvel movie or Star Wars film. So I don't know. There are a lot of negatives here. I wanted to throw this out to you guys because we were sort of going over these details yesterday, and I just wanted to sort of take your temperature on your thoughts on this, and if you can see any silver lining to this situation. Chris, what do you think first?
No, this is bad. This is a bad thing, and it will probably destroy movies as we know them. So that's cool.
All right, yeah, a pessimistic approach there. Brad, do you have any additional thoughts on this?
I want to hear what Martin Scorsese thinks.
We got an email from Sean from where he doesn't say where he's from, but Sean emailed us in, and he pointed out also that block booking, this practice that I was talking about, essentially that was the origin of the term B movies, was because like the A movies in the example that I just mentioned would be like the huge Mission Impossible film, and then B movies would be the smaller movies that were attached to these larger ones. And he basically says that back in the old Hollywood studio system days, this concept of block booking was good for studios because and customers and everything too, because it essentially allowed the studio to mitigate their risk and spread it over the course of a bunch of different smaller movies as well as that main movie. It's not just like all of the the money is riding on this one huge movie hopefully being a success. It's by theaters buying up the rights to distribute all of these at once. It sort of spreads the risk around a little bit, and it also gave back then the studios a little bit more freedom to take some more chances and be a little bit more experimental in the types of movies that they made. I just don't know if we're in a movie going or a business landscape environment right now in 2019 or 2020 or whenever this takes effect, where that same experimentation would thrive in the same way that it did back then. But that is another potential positive if something like that could happen. But anyway, I would encourage you guys all, if you're interested in this and want to know what might happen here, definitely read the full article. So
Brad Bird actually said something similar. He just tweeted about this today, and I was kind of interested in his quick take, because he wrote on Twitter, "I actually think theaters will only get better if studios can again have skin in the game. Forcing studios to surrender their cinemas in the 40s led to the disappearance of single-screen movie palaces in favor of look-alike lowest common denominator multiplexes," which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it remains to be seen what kind of business decisions these studios are going to take, because like, I don't know if you guys have heard this, but Disney has been making it very, very difficult for repertory theaters to play old Fox movies, 20th Century Fox movies that used to be regulars on the repertory circuit. But now that Disney owns Fox, they're sort of like throwing those in the vault and making them way more difficult for people to access, and sometimes like completely unable for people to get them at all in that environment. So, with Disney making moves like that already, the fact that they will have legal backing to return to this block booking thing, I'm just not sure that we should be relying on a studio's benevolence to make the best decisions for customers. But anyway, we'll see what happens there. Let's talk about the streaming world a little bit. Something the clash of major Hollywood studio filmmaking. They're giving way to streamers. We've already seen a bunch of huge movies go to Netflix, and another one that just went to Netflix is Beverly Hills Cop 4, which is a movie that's been in development for 20 years or something. Brad, what's going on here?
Lots. Axel Foley is now a bird.
Love it. It's the bird episode.
So this is kind of an interesting development, because Beverly Hills Cop 4 has been on again, off again for a long time. Everyone was hoping it would be made at some point, and now that Eddie Murphy is kind of enjoying this career resurgence, it's come back. Dolomite Is My Name has been very successful and received a lot of critical acclaim. He's got Coming to America 2 on the way from Paramount, but apparently Paramount might feel like their recent box office endeavors haven't been quite as lucrative as they want them to be, and they're not willing to take another risk on something that might not pay off for them after the failure of Terminator Dark Fate at the box office, because Paramount has sold the licensing rights to Beverly Hills Cop 4 to Netflix, and will let Netflix make the movie and make it part of their streaming library. And the deal also includes an option for a sequel. So Paramount has already had a relationship with Netflix, because they sent the Cloverfield Paradox to the streaming service for a surprise debut after the Super Bowl in 2018. And then Annihilation also went to Netflix outside of the United States after they kind of saw the box office receipts domestically weren't really paying off as well as they hoped they would. So Paramount seems to be trusting more and more in this model of, movies that they feel might be too risky and not bring as much of a profit return for them, and sending them to a streaming service. And this is kind of a big deal for Netflix too, because they've never really had a major movie franchise to bring hype, to any of their releases. The closest they've come would be, Stranger Things, but that's obviously a TV series. So this could be a big deal for them. There's some people have been talking, just amongst us, colleagues, entertainment reporters, and whatnot, that they feel like Netflix might be putting themselves into a position to maybe buy Paramount Pictures at some point.
Interesting. That I feel like Paramount doesn't have the standing that it once did in the industry right now. I think Sony is another one that there have been a lot of rumors that maybe Sony could get bought up. In this world of studio consolidation, it certainly wouldn't be completely out of left field if that happened. But man, that would be kind of crazy. Chris, are you interested in Beverly Hills Cop 4? I know this is a project that's been in the works for a long time, but with Eddie Murphy's career resurgence, as Brad said, is this something that you have maybe renewed interest in now?
Man, I don't know. I mean, I really liked or even loved Dolomite Is My Name, and it was great to be reminded that Eddie Murphy can still be really funny, but I don't know if Beverly Hills Cop 4 is the next thing to get me excited about what he's doing next, but I don't know.
What if Shane Black directs it?
Well, then, yeah, maybe I'll watch it, especially if it's a Christmas movie. Then I will watch it, but I guess it remains to be seen.
Yeah, because that's what I'm hoping for. I would love to see that happen. I don't know if that's even in the cards, but that's what I want to happen.
All right, so let's talk about Warner Brothers. This past weekend marked the, second anniversary of the release of Justice League, and if you were on Twitter, you probably saw a lot of people talking about the infamous Zack Snyder cut of this movie. Chris, what was happening here?
So even though I find it very hard to believe anyone would still even care about Justice League 2 years later, a lot of people do, and they want that Snyder cut. For those who don't know, which I find hard to believe at this point, but Zack Snyder, of course, is the credited director on Justice League. But the film was going through a troubled post-production, and Warner Brothers wanted edits to the cut that Snyder initially delivered. But sometime during post-production, Zack Snyder had to step away because of the death of his daughter, and Joss Whedon came in and he did a bunch of reshoots. So the end result is a film that is reportedly about 80% Snyder's and the rest is Whedon's. But on top of that, there's a lot of stuff that Snyder shot that didn't end up in the film at all, because Snyder's cut was a lot longer than the theatrical version. So for years now, 2 years to be exact, fans have insisted that the fabled Snyder cut is the better version of the film, even though they haven't seen it, so they have no proof of that. And they want it to be released. They want to prove that Zack Snyder's cut is, superior. So for years they've been begging for this to be released, and on the 2-year anniversary over the weekend, they blew up Twitter, and then sort of lending credence to all this, Snyder himself and Ben Affleck and Gal Gadot and Ray Fisher were all on social media sharing the same release the Snyder cut hashtag. And a lot of people thought this was building up to some sort of official announcement, especially because, all the actors primarily don't run their own social media accounts. They have people who do it for them. So the fact that they were tweeting out this hashtag sort of suggested this was some sort of coordinated promotional campaign. And
yeah, I don't think any of the cast have done anything like this in such a coordinated way before, like all in the same day, like tweeting the same message, this sort of like showing this unified front, right? I think this was like a first in the in the Snyder Cut lore.
Right, like Jason Momoa has sort of posted on Instagram in the past, but it's never been like this where everyone has come together. So a lot of us were like, oh, are they building up toward an announcement that they're finally going to release the Snyder Cut on, perhaps HBO Max, which is Warner Brothers' streaming service that's coming soon? And the answer is no.
At least right now, right?
Yeah, according to Warner Brothers themselves, they have no plans at this time to release any sort of Snyder cut. That might change someday. I don't know. But as of now, you shouldn't, hold your breath for the Snyder cut.
Brad, do you think it would be a good move on Warner Brothers' part to release the Snyder cut? I hate saying that because it's become such a ridiculous thing. But to actually release this thing maybe on HBO Max, like Chris said, do you think that would be like a smart decision? Because we talked in the past about how like one of the reasons that people might never actually see the Snyder cut is because it could reflect poorly on the executives at Warner Brothers who made this decision to to let Joss Whedon to basically attach their name to the finalized theatrical cut as it exists, right? Like if the Snyder cut is better, then those executives would have egg on their faces, and people in Hollywood hate to admit when they're wrong. So, but now I think maybe several of the people at Warner Brothers who were sort of overseeing this are either in different working in different capacities at the company, or in the case of Kevin Tsujihara, he is no longer the head of the studio. So now that he's out, do you think that there's a chance that they actually do release this thing on HBO Max?
I don't know. There's so much demand for it, but it's hard to tell how much of it is like a large demand or just a small group of very vocal fans who keep drumming up noise. And I think that it would be very interesting if Warner Brothers released it, and it might even build them some goodwill, among people. And it would certainly be an interesting way to drum up subscribers for HBO Max. But it just depends on how finished the movie really is as far as Snyder's vision is concerned, with visual effects and all that kind of stuff. And people have been digging into this for a long time now, and they've talked to various people on production, and they've learned like the original score by Junkie XL was completed, and there's maybe more finished visual effects shots than people think, to the point where they were almost done. So I don't know, it's I at this point I want to see it released just so people shut up about it. But I don't know. It's an interesting position for Warner Brothers to be in.
Yeah, I think for me, I would much rather see a brand new Superman movie starring Henry Cavill, and it seems like he is not done playing this character yet. So over the past year and a half, there's been a lot of back and forth about whether or not he was actually done. There were some rumors. I think The Hollywood Reporter published a story in September of 2018 saying that Cavill was out and he was negotiating to cameo in Shazam, and that fell apart, so he's done playing the character. Cavill himself has never really commented on that in a significant way. He posted this really bizarre video on Instagram. I linked to that in the show notes, so you can find that there. And that seemed to be his only comment on the situation. But now in a new interview with Men's Health, he says that he's not done playing the part yet. He said, "The cape is in the closet. It's still mine. I've not given up the role. There's a lot I have to give for Superman yet. A lot of storytelling to do. A lot of real, true depths to the honesty of the character that I want to get into. I want to reflect the comic books. That's important to me. There's a lot of justice to be done for Superman. The status is you'll see." So it seems like he's sort of teeing up another Superman movie, maybe even a solo movie. I think to me a solo movie would make a little bit more sense, considering how DC and Warner Brothers have sort of shifted their strategy away from the Justice League model and seem to be doing pretty well with these one-off movies, sort of taking up different corners of the DC universe. So I've always really liked Henry Cavill as Superman. I just felt like he was never really given great material to work with all the time. So I would love to see him come back to play this role. I know that Ben Affleck is out, and they've got Robert Pattinson coming up with a new Batman and all that, but I don't necessarily think that means that they should cut ties with Cavill. But what do you guys think? Would you want to see another Henry Cavill Superman movie, or do you think that it's better if they recast? Chris, what do you think?
I'd be interested. I think he could definitely deliver something good with a good script, giving him a chance to shine. I mean, I was not a fan of the Henry Cavill Superman stuff we got, but his performance in Mission Impossible Fallout proves that he can be a really charming actor, even when he, depending on the right role. So I think if they find a good script, they find a good director, I would be happy to watch him come back as Superman.
Brad, what do you think? What do you think about his comments about how he wants to reflect the comic books? That's, to me, that sort of seems like direct opposition to the Snyder, grim dark approach.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a movie that I'd be interested in seeing. Was where we get a Superman that is closer to the comics and gets away from Zack Snyder's decisions about how to treat the character. But at this point, how do you make a Henry Cavill Superman movie without having the bad taste of the rest of, the DC extended universe in your mouth, Wonder Woman notwithstanding, and maybe parts of Aquaman. But I don't know. I think Henry Cavill is pretty good as Superman, and it would be interesting to see him continue the role. But I think they're in a difficult position to do that simply because of how the rest of the DC Comics movies have played out.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about our last news story of the day, and that is that a Chinatown prequel series is coming to Netflix. Chris, what year did the original Chinatown come out, and what do you make of a prequel?
Yes, the original Chinatown is from 1974, and now Netflix wants to make a prequel TV series with David Fincher and Robert Towne. Robert Towne is the writer who wrote the original Chinatown. I don't know how to feel about this. I don't think we really need a Chinatown prequel. At the same time, I'm always excited for something new with David Fincher, and the fact that it's David Fincher teaming up with Robert Towne is hard to not get at least a little bit excited about. It's very strange because any Chinatown prequel is going to have the unenviable task of adding an actor who has to play, a young Jack Nicholson, and that's really hard to pull off, and it immediately adds baggage to whomever they cast in that role. So I don't know how to feel about this, but again, at the same time, it's hard to not get excited about a new David Fincher project. Do
we know what Fincher's actual involvement would be here? Is it going to be like a Mindhunter situation where he directs some episodes and is sort of like the overseeing the whole thing, or what do we know?
As of now, the deal is just for a pilot, and he and Towne are writing it together. And there's also a hope that he'll direct it. But other than that, there's nothing, official yet.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, the Fincher is involvement is sort of the X factor here, right? Like you're saying, I don't know if we need this, but especially with like something like Mindhunter, I think is a good example, right? Like that true crime sort of subgenre or whatever has been so well worn and is so like tried and true, and we've seen so many different variations on it. But Mindhunter, I think, is singular in its vision and its quality, and it has such a distinct look and a unique voice. So maybe even though an old school sort of neo-noir private eye story is something that we've seen a million times, maybe Fincher could bring could like reinvigorate that or bring some same like the same sort of level of uniqueness to that kind of story. Brad, what do you think about Fincher being involved with a Chinatown prequel?
If anyone's going to get me interested in the Chinatown prequel, it's somebody like David Fincher. He's proven he knows how to handle material like this, with Zodiac and Planet at 7, another thing. Mm-hmm. So it's it's one of those things where Chinatown has such a large legacy, and it's so damn good that like, how do you do a prequel series that even measures up to something like that? And does it matter? Is it necessary?
Yeah, maybe they'll take like the Fargo approach, where it sort of like tries to capture the I don't know, like the essence of the thing, like the tone of the thing, but it's not necessarily a slavish recreation of it, or even like maybe it's set in that same world, but I don't know. Just a thought. Okay, I think that's going to bring us to the end of today's episode. We touched on a lot of new stuff that's dropped over the past week. I think we'll be back, I think, tomorrow with another news episode. So yes, definitely stay tuned for that. Before we go, let's tell people where they can find more of our work online. Brad, let's start with you.
Always on slashfilm.com, on Twitter at Ethan_Anderton, and also my podcast, Go Flix Yourself, available on iTunes and other podcasting platforms.
And Chris?
Slashfilm.com, and I'm on Twitter at Evangelista413.
You can find me at slashfilm.com as well. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Ben Pears, and you can find more about all the stories that we mentioned on today's show at slashfilm.com and linked inside the show notes of this episode. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find on the site. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps, and send your feedback, questions, comments, and concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. Also, I feel like we should bring Chris's Advice Corner back. So if you have any questions, any pressing issues in your life that you want Chris's advice for, shoot those over to peter@slashfilm.com. We'll bust that theme song back out and get that thing back up and running. Please leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. And don't forget to rate and review the podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends about the show. Spread the word any way you can. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you tomorrow.